April 1945. The Ruhr Pocket. Smoke choked the sky, and shattered buildings cast jagged shadows across snow-streaked streets. The echo of artillery fire bounced between ruins, mingling with the distant wail of sirens and the faint cries of soldiers entrenched in defensive positions. Every movement was measured, every breath a calculated risk. The encircled German forces fought with desperation, their morale fraying as Allied units pressed inward, tightening the noose. Amid the chaos, a lone gunner crouched behind the wreckage of a collapsed wall. His weapon was standard issue, but its scope was shattered, cracked across the lens, the glass spiderwebbed from previous engagements. Others had dismissed it as useless, a liability in the precision-demanding firefights of the Ruhr. Yet he refused to discard it. Fingers numbed from the winter cold, he adjusted the cracked lens, sighting along the imperfect crosshair with meticulous care. Enemy soldiers moved through the debris like shadows, unaware that they were being watched. The gunner's shots, though guided by a broken instrument, found their marks with uncanny accuracy. Whispers spread among both sides. An unseen sharpshooter with a damaged scope, impossible to anticipate, devastating in effect. In the streets of the Ruhr Pocket, fear became tangible. And it was born from a broken lens, a steady hand, and a mind determined to turn limitation into lethal advantage. By April 1945, the Ruhr Pocket had become a cauldron of desperation. Encircled by Allied forces, approximately 300,000 German troops were trapped in a shrinking territory crisscrossed with rivers, canals, and industrial ruins. Cities like Essen, Dortmund, and Duisburg were reduced to rubble. Streets obstructed by collapsed buildings, smoldering vehicles, and tangled debris. The strategic importance of the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heartland, made it a critical objective for the Allies. Controlling it meant depriving the German war machine of its remaining resources and crippling any organized resistance. The encircled German forces, though numerically significant, faced severe logistical challenges. Ammunition was scarce, food supplies dwindled, and medical support was minimal. Communication lines were disrupted by Allied artillery and air attacks, isolating units and fragmenting command structures. Soldiers fought under constant stress, aware that reinforcements were impossible and that each engagement could be their last. In this environment, improvisation and adaptability became essential survival skills. Artillery and sniper units were particularly critical in these conditions. Narrow streets, fortified positions, and ruined factories created deadly choke points. Conventional targeting relied on accurate optics, calculations of distance, and clear line of sight, all increasingly difficult in the shattered urban terrain. Any failure in equipment, especially scopes or sights, could render even the most experienced gunner ineffective, potentially exposing their position to counterfire. It was in this crucible that the gunner of our story emerged. Assigned to a small infantry support unit, he was responsible for targeting enemy positions from elevated vantage points within ruined structures. His scope, damaged in a prior engagement, presented a seemingly insurmountable handicap. Peers advised replacement or reassignment, arguing that accuracy without a reliable lens was impossible. Yet he persisted, confident that skill, observation, and improvisation could compensate for the mechanical defect. The Ruhr Pocket itself posed unique tactical challenges. Streets were narrow and often littered with debris, limiting mobility for tanks and vehicles. Allied forces, employing combined arms tactics, used artillery barrages, armored units, and infantry sweeps to suppress German positions. In response, German defenders relied on sniper fire, booby traps, and localized ambushes to slow the advance. Every engagement was a delicate balance between concealment, positioning, and firepower, a test of both equipment reliability and human skill. Morale among German troops varied sharply. Some units had resigned themselves to inevitable surrender, while others fought with tenacity fueled by desperation and the hope of holding strategic positions. In such conditions, stories of exceptional individual performance, a sniper hitting critical targets, a machine gunner holding a street corner against overwhelming odds, carried disproportionate psychological weight. They inspired allies and terrified opponents, demonstrating that even minor innovations or extraordinary skill could tip localized engagements in favor of the defender. The gunner's broken scope, while seemingly a liability, fit into this dynamic. In the cluttered ruins, traditional optics could be obstructed by debris or damaged by nearby explosions. The imperfect scope forced the gunner to rely on a combination of intuition, environmental cues, and precise judgment of range and wind. By integrating these techniques, he could exploit angles, anticipate enemy movements, and maintain lethal accuracy despite the mechanical limitation. At the same time, Allied reconnaissance and patrols had begun to recognize the Ruhr Pocket's unpredictability. Units reported unusually precise sniper fire in locations where defenders had no clear line of sight. Soldiers whispered of a marksman whose shots seemed almost impossible, a single figure capable of dominating narrow streets and choke points. This reputation, though initially based on fragmented reports, began to influence Allied tactics, forcing them to move cautiously and rethink direct advances. Within this context, the stage was set. The Ruhr Pocket was more than a battlefield. It was a labyrinth of destruction, fear, and improvisation. Every soldier faced challenges posed by environment, equipment, and enemy pressure. In such conditions, a single gunner's ingenuity could resonate far beyond the immediate kill zone. A broken scope was no longer a limitation. It was a tool to be mastered, a test of human skill, and a potential instrument of psychological dominance over a trapped enemy. The coming days would prove that one man, armed with skill, focus, and an imperfect weapon, could change the dynamics of an entire sector. What others dismissed as a liability would become a symbol of fear, and in the chaos of the Ruhr Pocket, mastery of imperfection would emerge as a decisive force. The gunner's unit was small, highly mobile, and tasked with defending critical positions amid the rubble of the Ruhr cities. Communication with other units was intermittent, radios often jammed by artillery interference or destroyed infrastructure. Commanders relied on field reports and visual signals to coordinate movement, creating a tense environment where independent decision-making was essential. In this environment, the gunner's broken scope was both a practical concern and a test of ingenuity. Peers initially mocked the device. They had grown accustomed to the precision demanded by urban warfare, where missing a target could expose one's position to devastating counterfire. A cracked lens, they argued, was a liability. "Why risk your life with that?" one officer had remarked, eyes scanning the damage in disbelief, yet the gunner refused to abandon the scope. He understood that conventional equipment might fail in unexpected ways and that adaptation, rather than reliance on perfection, was the true measure of battlefield effectiveness. Technically, the scope's damage presented multiple challenges. The cracks disrupted reticle alignment, refracted light inconsistently, and created blind spots in the field of view. Normally, such flaws would render long-range targeting nearly impossible. However, the gunner had spent weeks calibrating his aim to compensate. He learned to anticipate the displacement caused by the fractured glass, adjusted for wind, distance, and the unpredictability of debris-littered streets. Every shot became a calculated measure, integrating skill, observation, and experience to overcome mechanical limitations. The Ruhr Pocket itself magnified these challenges. Narrow streets, bombed-out factories, and twisted metal created complex lines of sight. Enemy troops advanced cautiously, aware that ambushes and sniper fire could appear from any angle. The gunner exploited these constraints, using the broken scope as both a literal and metaphorical lens through which to dominate his sector. By predicting enemy movement and compensating for environmental distortion, he could achieve lethal accuracy that confounded both peers and adversaries. His reputation began subtly, through whispered accounts among nearby soldiers. "There's a sniper on the corner of the old mill," one infantryman would murmur. You won't see him, but you'll feel the effect. Allied patrols reported sudden, precise losses in areas previously thought safe. Observers were puzzled. How could a gunner with a visibly damaged scope maintain such accuracy under chaotic conditions? The answer lay not in magic or luck, but in methodical adaptation. This period also highlighted the interplay between human psychology and mechanical failure. Troops under fire are acutely sensitive to perceived threats. The gunner's skill with a damaged instrument magnified this effect. Fear became a force multiplier. Enemy soldiers hesitated, altered patrol patterns, and sometimes abandoned objectives entirely to avoid unseen precision fire. In a confined and chaotic battlefield, the psychological impact of a single, reliable marksman was as consequential as any artillery barrage. The gunner's success was not accidental. It required meticulous preparation, an intimate understanding of his weapon, and keen observation of the environment. He mapped fields of fire in his mind, visualized trajectories disrupted by cracks in the glass, and internalized angles and distances that might challenge even experienced marksmen. Every engagement reinforced his confidence and refined his technique, transforming a broken scope from a liability into a force multiplier. All of this unfolded against the backdrop of the Ruhr Pocket strategic collapse. German units were encircled, resources dwindled, and morale was fragile. Yet within this desperation, individual initiative created pockets of control. The gunner's adaptation exemplified the principle that, in war, ingenuity can offset material shortcomings. Where conventional thinking emphasized flawless equipment and procedure, he demonstrated that human skill, observation, and innovation could redefine the limits of possibility. By the time major engagements erupted in central Dortmund, the gunner had become an unseen force shaping the battle. Allies moved with caution, aware that a single shot could alter outcomes, and his own unit relied on his skill to protect key positions. The broken scope, once dismissed as a handicap, had become a pivotal instrument in the defense of the Ruhr. The stage was set for a confrontation in which the limits of equipment, the precision of human skill, and the psychological dynamics of warfare would collide. In the chaos of industrial ruins and encircled defenses, a single gunner's ingenuity was about to become the most feared element in a rapidly collapsing battlefield. Urban warfare in the Ruhr Pocket demanded more than technical skill. It demanded resilience against fear, fatigue, and chaos. Soldiers navigated narrow streets layered with debris, shells, and rubble, their senses constantly assaulted by explosions, smoke, and cries. Every moment required vigilance. One misstep could expose a sniper's position or trigger a lethal counterattack. In this environment, the gunner's human qualities were as critical as his weapon. Patience, observation, and mental endurance determined the difference between survival and instant death. Crew members who worked alongside him witnessed his meticulous attention to detail, the calm precision of his adjustments, and his refusal to yield to frustration despite the broken scope. Skepticism from peers slowly transformed into trust. They observed, in real time, that his skill could offset any mechanical flaw. The gunner's focus anchored the unit psychologically. In the chaos of encirclement and artillery bombardment, soldiers relied on his ability to identify threats and neutralize them. Each successful engagement reinforced morale, instilling confidence that precise action was still possible even under extreme conditions. Conversely, every failure could have sown panic, fractured coordination, and increased vulnerability. The human element, the capacity to remain calm, deliberate, and observant, became as lethal as the bullets themselves. Mechanically, a broken scope is a nightmare for accuracy. Cracked glass, misaligned reticles, and unpredictable light refraction introduce errors in targeting that even seasoned gunners struggle to compensate for. The gunner's mastery came from methodical adaptation, measuring deviations, calculating offsets, and adjusting for environmental variables such as wind, debris, and partial cover. He transformed a flawed instrument into a precision tool through technique rather than replacement. This technical improvisation highlights a principle often overlooked in military analysis. Mechanical failure does not preclude effectiveness if skill, observation, and adjustment are applied rigorously. The gunner studied the fractured lens, understood its distortions, and integrated them into a mental model of ballistics and sightlines. In a war where flawless instruments were scarce and often damaged in combat, his approach was both pragmatic and innovative. In the cluttered, narrow streets of the Ruhr, tactical control relied heavily on localized firepower. A single sniper could dominate intersections, rooftops, and fortified positions. The gunner exploited this dynamic by positioning himself in key locations, using the broken scope to anticipate enemy movement and cover vulnerable avenues. His precision influenced the broader engagement. Enemy patrols altered routes, reinforcements hesitated, and infantry movements slowed in anticipation of unseen fire. The broken scope, rather than limiting effectiveness, became a tactical force multiplier. It allowed the gunner to control territory disproportionately to his numbers, demonstrating how skill and adaptability could shape operational outcomes in urban combat. Leadership in this context was not hierarchical but practical. The gunner set an example through initiative and mastery over adversity. By continuing to rely on a flawed scope, he implicitly taught peers the value of improvisation, observation, and decisive action. Commanders and unit members began to recognize that rigid adherence to standard equipment was insufficient. Adaptability, when combined with skill, could redefine battlefield effectiveness. Innovation was subtle but transformative. The gunner's techniques, compensating for lens fractures, recalibrating sightlines, and predicting enemy movement, became informal lessons for the squad. His actions redefined what was considered possible with damaged equipment, highlighting the relationship between ingenuity and leadership in extreme conditions. Fear is magnified in confined, chaotic urban environments. Enemy soldiers became unnerved by the unexpected precision of sniper fire, especially when reports described losses from unseen positions. Confidence in the gunner's skill had a dual effect. For allies, it reinforced focus and morale. For enemies, it induced caution, hesitation, and psychological fatigue. The broken scope itself, a visible flaw, amplified this psychological impact. Initially underestimated, the gunner's accuracy created a cognitive dissonance for the enemy. How could someone with a visibly damaged weapon be so deadly? This fear constrained enemy actions, slowed advances, and created openings for the defender's unit to exploit, demonstrating that psychological influence can be as decisive as tactical firepower. Across all angles, human, technical, tactical, leadership, and psychological, one theme emerges: mastery of limitation. A broken instrument, when combined with skill, foresight, and adaptability, becomes a weapon not only of precision but of influence. In the Ruhr Pocket, where conventional tools were failing and chaos reigned, one gunner's ingenuity transformed perceived weakness into tactical and psychological dominance, altering the battlefield in ways that no standard weapon could achieve. The stage was set. The gunner's precision, born of flawed optics and relentless skill, would soon define the outcome of engagements across the Ruhr, proving that in war, human ingenuity can surpass the reliability of any machine. From the perspective of the Allied forces advancing through the Ruhr Pocket, the presence of an unseen marksman quickly became a source of mounting concern. Patrols reported precise casualties from positions that appeared undefended. Infantry units altered routes, hesitated at intersections, and occasionally abandoned objectives to avoid lethal sniper zones. This disruption, while subtle, slowed advances and forced adjustments to operational plans. Enemy reconnaissance could not locate the source of the deadly shots. The broken scope, combined with the gunner's tactical positioning, rendered him effectively invisible. Reports described an almost supernatural accuracy. Men fell before they could identify the line of fire, vehicles were disabled by precise shots to vulnerable points, and artillery observers struggled to pinpoint the origin. The psychological effect was severe. Hesitation became pervasive, as soldiers second-guessed every movement, questioning whether the next step would expose them to the invisible lethal force controlling the streets. The gunner's actions exemplify a subtle form of leadership, influence through performance rather than rank. By mastering a flawed instrument, he demonstrated that skill and ingenuity could overcome mechanical limitations. Fellow soldiers observed and adapted, learning to trust unconventional methods and improvisation. Innovation under duress often manifests in small but critical adjustments. The gunner recalibrated his aim to account for glass fractures, mapped his field of fire intuitively, and communicated vital positioning information to his unit. These practices not only increased the effectiveness of his own fire but enhanced the tactical awareness of the surrounding team. In essence, one man's mastery transformed the operational approach of an entire squad, showing that leadership emerges from competence and creativity as much as authority. Tactically, the gunner's presence reshaped engagements within the Ruhr Pocket. Narrow streets and ruined buildings offered both cover and choke points. By exploiting these constraints, he could control movement, channeling enemy forces into predictable paths and targeting key points with precision. Every successful shot forced adjustments in enemy behavior. Patrols slowed, reinforcements were delayed, and attempts to flank were met with immediate suppression. In urban warfare, where terrain favors defenders, the gunner leveraged his flawed scope to maximize tactical advantage. One man effectively dictated the pace and positioning of enemy units, amplifying the defensive capability of his own squad. The broken scope, paradoxically, became a tool of strategic influence, converting a personal handicap into a decisive battlefield asset. The story of the gunner also carries a moral dimension. War often values machinery, numerical superiority, and doctrine over individual ingenuity. Yet the Ruhr Pocket demonstrates that courage, skill, and determination can alter outcomes where conventional resources are lacking. By persisting with a damaged scope, the gunner embraced responsibility for his actions and their consequences. Each shot was deliberate, each calculation carefully considered. This conscientious approach exemplifies the moral imperative of maximizing effectiveness while minimizing unnecessary risk, both to himself and his squad. In doing so, he transformed skepticism and perceived weakness into a source of survival, demonstrating that ethical courage and ingenuity are intertwined in extreme conditions. The broken scope symbolizes the intersection of human skill and mechanical limitation. It represents adaptability, resourcefulness, and the potential to transcend apparent weakness. In a battlefield dominated by superior technology and organized firepower, the gunner's weapon became a testament to human agency. The cracked lens, once mocked, became a defining feature of his influence. It reminded both allies and enemies that limitations are not absolute barriers but challenges to be overcome. In the industrial ruins of the Ruhr, the scope was a symbol of precision, adaptability, and the quiet yet lethal effectiveness of individual initiative. Finally, the gunner's effectiveness had profound psychological repercussions. Confidence in his ability to hit targets despite a damaged scope bolstered Allied morale and fostered trust in his judgment. Conversely, enemy forces experienced heightened fear and uncertainty. In urban combat, the unseen sniper becomes a psychological weapon. The knowledge that one could fall at any moment without warning creates hesitation, cautious movement, and operational slowdowns. The broken scope, by enabling extraordinary precision, magnified this psychological effect. Every step the enemy took was measured against an invisible threat, reinforcing the gunner's dominance not just through bullets, but through fear and anticipation. Across all angles, human, technical, tactical, leadership, moral, symbolic, and psychological, the broken scope emerges as more than a defective instrument. It becomes a nexus of survival, influence, and ingenuity. In the Ruhr Pocket, one gunner turned limitation into a decisive advantage, shaping not only the physical battlefield but the minds and actions of friend and foe alike. The next phase would push this mastery to its ultimate test, A climactic engagement where the scope's limitations and the gunner's skill collide in a high-stakes battle that would define the legend of the most feared weapon in the Ruhr. The streets of Dortmund were a frozen labyrinth, twisted by months of bombing and artillery fire. Smoke curled from collapsed factories, mixing with the bitter scent of powder and steel. Allied troops advanced cautiously, aware that the German defenders, though encircled and outnumbered, possessed the knowledge of every alley, intersection, and rubble-strewn street. Among them, the gunner took position on a shattered rooftop, his broken scope trained on a crucial intersection where enemy reinforcements were expected. The scope, cracked across its glass, was a constant challenge. Light fractured unpredictably, reticles shifted slightly with each movement, and the field of view was compromised. Yet the gunner adjusted instinctively, compensating for the distortions through a combination of observation, calculation, and intimate knowledge of his weapon. His breath clouded in the icy air as he aligned the cracked crosshair with distant movement, calculating angles, wind, and distance in milliseconds. Enemy patrols entered the kill zone, unaware of the precise force awaiting them. The first shot rang out, silenced only by distance, yet it found its mark with devastating effect. A single soldier fell, throwing his squad into immediate confusion. Subsequent shots maintained a rhythm, each calculated and deliberate. The broken scope, seemingly inadequate, allowed the gunner to dominate the engagement, controlling enemy movement and channeling troops into predictable paths. From below, squad members recognized the effect immediately. The gunner's fire was surgical, eliminating threats while minimizing exposure to his own position. Allies adjusted their movements to complement his control, securing streets that might otherwise have been lost. The unit relied on his skill as both a shield and a weapon, trusting that each shot, though guided by a flawed instrument, would succeed. The enemy response was swift and anxious. Officers shouted orders, attempting to locate the source of the lethal fire. Soldiers hesitated at corners, abandoned vehicles, and slow patrols disrupted the advance. Intelligence officers began documenting the unnerving precision, recording patterns of engagement that did not align with conventional tactics. The gunner's mastery of the broken scope had transformed his individual role into a tactical leverage point, affecting decisions far beyond his immediate field of fire. Environmental conditions amplified both challenge and opportunity. Smoke, fog, and debris created partial concealment, forcing the gunner to anticipate movement rather than rely on clear sightlines. Every shot demanded not only precision but foresight. Miscalculations could expose his position to counterfire, yet his adaptability allowed him to predict enemy movement with uncanny accuracy. Each confirmed hit reinforced both his confidence and the tactical influence he exerted over the battlefield. Hours passed with relentless intensity. The broken scope became an extension of his perception, translating visual distortion into actionable targeting. He adjusted for wind, debris drift, and the unpredictable sway of his own platform. Each engagement demonstrated that mechanical imperfection could be mitigated, even exploited, through human skill and deliberate observation. Allied units began to report a phantom sniper, a marksman whose shots defied expectation. Rumors spread quickly among German forces as well. One man, a single gunner with a damaged instrument, was dictating the pace and outcome of engagements in the Ruhr Pocket. Within the squad, morale soared. The gunner's actions not only defended key positions, but inspired belief that even in encirclement and chaos, skill and ingenuity could produce decisive results. By the end of the first critical phase, enemy forces had suffered confusion, casualties, and operational delays. Streets that should have been accessible were now dominated by a single, precise force. The broken scope, once dismissed as useless, had become a tool of control, intimidation, and tactical advantage. The gunner had turned limitation into authority, demonstrating that innovation under pressure could alter not just a skirmish, but the operational environment of an entire urban sector. As smoke continued to rise from the destroyed cityscape, The gunner prepared for the next phase of engagement. The stakes would escalate, and enemy forces, aware of the unseen lethal presence, would concentrate their efforts to neutralize it. The tension was palpable, and the mastery of the broken scope was about to face its ultimate test. The second engagement erupted as reinforcements attempted to secure a vital bridge over the Ruhr Canal. The gunner, positioned in a partially collapsed factory overlooking the crossing, adjusted the broken scope, noting subtle shifts in light and shadow that indicated enemy movement. Each crack in the glass had become familiar terrain. He read the distortions as carefully as any undamaged lens, translating fractured lines into precise targeting vectors. Enemy forces approached in small squads, cautious but determined. They had begun to hear whispers of a phantom marksman, yet the reality of his skill was beyond expectation. The first volley of shots fell with uncanny accuracy, halting the advance before it fully began. Soldiers ducked behind rubble, vehicles stalled at choke points, and officers struggled to coordinate a coherent response. The psychological effect was immediate. Fear compounded by confusion, amplified by the knowledge that any exposed position could be fatal. The gunner's squad watched in silent awe. His calculation and timing dictated the pace of battle. Each shot accounted for wind gusts, uneven terrain, and enemy cover. Even with a cracked scope, he was faster to target and more precise than many armed with fully operational optics. Allies coordinated secondary movements around his fire, exploiting the corridors of controlled space he had established. The broken scope, paradoxically, enhanced his awareness. By compensating for flaws, he became intimately familiar with angles, trajectories, and the subtleties of the battlefield. Enemy officers attempted counter-sniper maneuvers, deploying scouts and suppressive fire. Yet the gunner's adaptive techniques maintained effectiveness. By anticipating patterns of movement and adjusting for visual distortion, he remained unpredictable. Reports from both sides described the marksman as impossible to pin down, each shot appearing almost instantaneous. The bridge crossing became a death trap for the unprepared, and enemy morale plummeted under the relentless precision. Within the encircled German forces, confidence grew. Soldiers who had been anxious moments before now relied on the gunner's guidance to stabilize their positions and execute counterattacks. His ability to dominate the engagement from a single vantage point transformed tactical dynamics. Narrow streets and ruined buildings that would normally channel attackers became lethal zones for the enemy, demonstrating how one individual, armed with ingenuity and skill, could control a disproportionately large area. The engagement escalated further as artillery fire began to supplement the gunner's targeting. Observers relayed coordinates based on his reports, creating a synergy between adaptive marksmanship and conventional firepower. Enemy forces were trapped in a web of deadly precision. Movement slowed, attacks faltered, and each advance was measured against an unseen yet omnipresent lethal force. The broken scope had become more than a weapon. It was a tool of strategic influence. Hours stretched into a grueling continuum of precision fire and tactical maneuvering. The gunner's focus never wavered. He tracked individual soldiers, adjusted for recoil, and recalculated trajectories for every new target. Each shot reinforced his growing legend, the man with the damaged scope who could strike with inhuman accuracy, shaping the battle in real time. Allied forces began to avoid the sector entirely, shifting their strategy to circumvent the deadly corridor he controlled. By the end of the engagement, the bridge remained in German hands. Casualties among attacking units were significant, morale was shattered, and operational plans had been forced to adapt around a single, seemingly minor variable. One gunner with a broken scope. Within his own unit, respect and trust in his abilities had reached near reverence. He had demonstrated that equipment limitations could be overcome by observation, skill, and adaptive thinking, transforming vulnerability into dominance. The aftermath of the battle left a lasting impression. Enemy reports, fragmented and panicked, described an impossible sharpshooter whose accuracy defied explanation. Within German ranks, his reputation spread quickly, a symbol of ingenuity, resilience, and the lethal power of human skill under extreme conditions. The broken scope, once a liability, had become the most feared instrument in the Ruhr Pocket, a weapon whose influence extended far beyond its mechanical function. As smoke cleared and the first rays of dawn touched the ruined streets, the gunner surveyed the battlefield. The bridge remained intact. His unit had survived intact, and the legend of the broken scope, forged in the chaos of the Ruhr, had been cemented in both ally and enemy consciousness. The stage was now set for the consequences to unfold, as the strategic and psychological impact of a single, adaptive soldier would ripple across the final days of the Ruhr encirclement. In the wake of the bridge engagement, the impact of the gunner's actions became immediately evident. Allied patrols hesitated to advance through sectors previously dominated by his fire. Reports of high casualties and unexplained precision hits forced operational adjustments. Entire units rerouted, supply lines slowed, and coordinated attacks were deferred. One man, armed with a broken scope and unmatched skill, had altered the tactical landscape of the Ruhr Pocket. Within his own squad, the effect was equally profound. Soldiers who had doubted the utility of the damaged scope now relied on his judgment and precision. Morale, fragile in the encircled and resource-strained environment, surged. Confidence in survival and operational success became anchored to the gunner's ability to dominate critical zones. Every shot, every calculation, reinforced trust and unity within the unit. The psychological advantage created by one individual extended beyond the physical impact of his fire. Allied observers were puzzled. Multiple after-action reports described a phantom marksman controlling streets with near-inhuman accuracy. Attempts to counter him, either through flanking maneuvers or suppressive fire, failed repeatedly. Commanders documented the phenomenon in internal notes, noting that movement within his sector was now constrained and that progress required careful reconnaissance. Fear, more than firepower, dictated the tempo of engagement. The broken scope, in effect, had become a tool of psychological warfare, its reputation amplifying its tactical influence. From a technical standpoint, the gunner's methods offered lessons in adaptation and ingenuity. The cracks in the lens forced him to calculate offsets and distortions in real time, integrating variables like wind, angle, and elevation. What initially appeared to be a liability had, through skillful compensation, become an advantage. He could manipulate the battlefield with precision unmatched by conventional reliance on perfect equipment. Engineering officers took note, recognizing that human adaptability could mitigate equipment flaws and transform limitations into strategic assets. The operational consequences extended beyond individual engagements. Enemy forces moved more cautiously, altering their formations and avoiding streets once considered passable. Every delay, hesitation, and rerouted attack cumulatively shifted the tempo of operations in the sector. In a confined and heavily damaged urban landscape, this influence was significant. One gunner's mastery, amplified by fear and reputation, had effectively reshaped the operational map without a single conventional strategic directive. Internally, the squad recognized the broader implications. The gunner had not only preserved lives through precision but had established a precedent for adaptive tactics. Lessons were informally transmitted to other squads. How to exploit environmental cues, compensate for equipment failure, and maintain control under extreme conditions. The broken scope, once dismissed, became a symbol of the importance of observation, calculation, and human initiative over reliance on perfect machinery. The psychological dimension continued to unfold in subtle ways. Enemy forces avoided confrontation wherever his influence was known. Reports of ambushes and precision strikes were shared across units, increasing caution and reinforcing hesitation. Within the German defensive perimeter, soldiers observed the tangible effect of skilled marksmanship combined with ingenuity, the morale boost of allies witnessing a reliable protector, and the terror experienced by those who faced an unseen but lethal presence. By the end of the initial aftermath, the strategic significance was clear. The gunners' precision fire had not only influenced immediate engagements, but had created ripple effects across the Ruhr Pocket. Operational plans, troop movements, and the enemy's approach had all been altered by one individual's ability to transform a damaged instrument into a decisive weapon. His actions illustrated a fundamental principle of warfare. Skill, observation, and adaptability can often outweigh numbers and technological superiority. As the squad secured the sector and prepared for subsequent engagements, the stage was set for the long-term consequences to emerge. The reputation of the broken scope, once mocked and underestimated, was now cemented in both ally and enemy consciousness. What had begun as a mechanical flaw had evolved into a decisive instrument, shaping both the physical and psychological battlefield in ways that would influence the remainder of the Ruhr Pocket campaign. In the days following the bridge engagement, the gunners' influence continued to shape the Ruhr Pocket's dynamics. Enemy forces, now acutely aware of his presence, altered entire approaches to the battlefield. Patrols moved slowly, advancing only in small, cautious increments. Reinforcements were rerouted, and artillery targeting adjusted to account for his position. Reports described a growing sense of unpredictability, an invisible hand dictating the pace of operations, and a pervasive fear that slowed even the most determined units. Within his squad, the gunner became a central figure. Soldiers observed how he calculated angles, compensated for distortions in the broken scope, and anticipated movement with uncanny precision. His methods were quietly transmitted to others. Adjustments to positioning, use of environmental cover, and predictive targeting became standard practice. The mechanical flaw that had once drawn ridicule was now a tool of mastery, highlighting the profound impact of human skill and adaptability in extreme conditions. The psychological effect on both sides was striking. Allied forces hesitated in streets where the gunner's influence was known, and rumors of his accuracy spread quickly. Reports described the phantom marksman as operating with superhuman precision, unseen and lethal. Within the German ranks, confidence soared. Soldiers now understood that ingenuity, experience, and determination could offset numerical inferiority. The broken scope had become a symbol of resilience and tactical ingenuity, inspiring trust and reinforcing unit cohesion. Operationally, the gunners' actions had broader consequences. Areas previously thought accessible became no-go zones for advancing units. Commanders recalculated strategies, factoring in both the physical and psychological impact of one precise operator. His ability to dominate key positions, combined with environmental knowledge and improvisation, forced the enemy to act defensively, effectively shaping the battle without relying on additional manpower or heavy artillery. From a technical perspective, the broken scope's effectiveness challenged assumptions about equipment reliability. It demonstrated that imperfections could be mitigated through skill, observation, and adaptive tactics. The gunner's mastery over flawed optics became a case study in ingenuity, emphasizing the role of human intellect over mechanical perfection. Engineering officers and squad leaders took note, considering how training and adaptive thinking might compensate for other equipment shortcomings across the theater. The legend of the gunner grew with each engagement. Reports filtered up to higher command, noting both the tactical disruption he caused and the morale boost his precision imparted to his unit. Allies and adversaries alike began to view him as a defining factor in localized operations, a single force capable of dictating outcomes beyond his immediate firepower. This influence, born of meticulous calculation and courage, demonstrated the interplay between skill, reputation, and battlefield control. By the close of the week, the broken scope had become a symbol of dominance, innovation, and human resourcefulness. It highlighted the importance of observation, patience, and adaptability in urban warfare, showing that the most decisive weapons are not always those manufactured for the battlefield, but those mastered by the mind and hand of a determined individual. The aftermath of the Ruhr Pocket engagements revealed a critical lesson. In war, Ingenuity can reshape operational reality. One man's ability to turn a flawed instrument into a lethal tool altered the behavior, strategy, and psychology of enemy forces while simultaneously inspiring confidence and cohesion within his own ranks. Mechanical limitation was transformed into tactical advantage. Fear became a force multiplier, and survival hinged on skill, observation, and initiative. As the gunner prepared for further missions, his reputation had already achieved its full effect. Allies understood the importance of his presence, and enemies approached with caution bordering on terror. The broken scope, once dismissed as trivial, had become a defining instrument in the Ruhr Pocket, a testament to the power of human adaptability and the profound impact of individual skill in shaping the course of battle. The next phase would reflect not just the tactical consequences but the broader historical significance of such ingenuity, a moment where human creativity, precision, and courage transcended mechanical limitations and left an indelible mark on both the battlefield and memory of the Ruhr campaign. The story of the gunner in the Ruhr Pocket reminds us that history is often shaped not only by grand strategies and overwhelming firepower but by the ingenuity and determination of individuals. A broken scope, an instrument dismissed as defective, became the focal point of survival, precision, and influence. In the chaos of urban warfare, where streets were twisted by rubble and every movement carried lethal risk, human skill proved more decisive than equipment alone. The gunner's mastery highlights a fundamental truth about conflict. Mechanical imperfections are not absolute barriers when matched with observation, experience, and adaptability. Each crack in the glass became a guide, each imperfection an element to compensate for and integrate into a broader understanding of angles, trajectories, and enemy behavior. In doing so, the gunner transformed limitation into opportunity, demonstrating that innovation often emerges under pressure and in conditions that seem insurmountable. Beyond the technical and tactical dimensions, there was a profound psychological impact. Confidence, trust, and cohesion flourished within his squad, while fear and hesitation gripped enemy forces. One man, armed with skill and ingenuity, became a force multiplier, shaping decisions, movements, and outcomes far beyond his immediate sphere. The broken scope was no longer just a tool. It became a symbol of adaptability, resilience, and the subtle power of individual initiative in the crucible of war. This narrative also underscores the moral dimension of innovation under duress. The gunner's success was rooted in disciplined observation, careful calculation, and a commitment to maximizing effectiveness while protecting his comrades. Courage, skill, and conscientious action combined to create results that equipment alone could never guarantee. It reminds us that heroism often resides in quiet mastery rather than in spectacle, and that the human mind can wield far more influence than the most advanced tools when faced with extreme adversity. Ultimately, the gunner's broken scope became a legend not because of technology, but because of human ingenuity and determination. In the frozen, rubble-strewn streets of the Ruhr, where chaos and destruction reigned, one man turned apparent weakness into dominance, leaving an enduring lesson. The most powerful tools in warfare are often those shaped by insight, skill, and the relentless will to adapt. The broken scope transformed fear into authority, limitation into mastery, and survival into legend, demonstrating that even in the twilight of conflict, human creativity remains the decisive force on the battlefield.